Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit. Accept no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to look back into history, and we're going to study the rise of this cult called the Assassins. And we're going to look tonight into their secret doctrine, and we're going to see how very influential that this one particular small group of radicals, how influential they have been to some of these other secret society groups throughout the course of time. We're going to discuss the Seveners, the secret doctrine of the Assassins, and this is likely going to run into a series of episodes here. This will be part 1 tonight. We're going to lay down some foundational statements here about the Assassins, and we're going to let you know just who and what this cult was and who they are today, because you see, they still exist today. Now, this is sometimes called by other names. These are referred to as the Ismaili Nizaris in some circles. So this is something that's hugely important. Now, in order to understand the rise of this cult, founded by Hassan ibn Sabah, the old man of the mountain, back in the 11th century, we need to understand a little bit of the background here going into this. This was based upon a split in the realms of the development of Islam after the death of Muhammad. Now, when this happened, there were various groups who pretty much were fighting for who it was that got to be the main speaker for the entire religion of Islam, and who would be the imam, who was the leader, and there was some infighting among some of Muhammad's family members and close associates as to who it should be that should carry on the tradition, who should be the leader. And we had this split into two distinct groups early on, after this point. And one of those groups came to be known as the Ismailis, due to one of these descendants of Muhammad. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we read into the history of all of it here. But it is from this group, the Ismailis, that this Nizari cult of Ismailis came into prominence and rose. And they were known as the Assassins, or the Hashishin, named after, ostensibly, if you listen to the mainstream history, named after hashish, one of the substances that the old man of the mountain, Hassan Sabah, used in order to convince some young converts into believing that he himself had control of access to paradise for them upon their deaths. So there's a lot of interesting history to get into with this. And we're going to set it up here before we get into the primary source that we'll be reading from tonight. We're going to go to a secondary source, first of all, just to lay down some foundations so we know what we're talking about. Because although I have done a show or two in the past talking about the assassins, it might be worth looking over and reviewing some of what we know about this group. And you need to realize this organization had a massive influence on later secret society groups, most notably the Templars, which arose and were founded shortly after the advent of the assassins, and many of their doctrines were taken from the assassins, and it is recorded in the annals of mainstream history that the assassins themselves said that they would take on the exterior teachings of Christianity if it suited their purposes. So you need to understand there's a lineage here that most people dare not try to connect the dots with, because a lot of it is tucked away in the hidden records of the secret society groups. And you won't hear about much of it in the mainstream history of things, but there are certain researchers of the past who've done a phenomenal job bringing out some of this material, looking at the old Eastern teachings, the old Oriental teachings, the things that were recorded, and translating them into European languages. And one of these was a man named Joseph Von Hammer, who later took on the surname Purgstall. Joseph Von Hammer Purgstall translated a lot of these different old accounts and records that he found. He was quite the historian. And he put them primarily in German. And we're going to be reading from a source that translates the German to the English. And this one was published in 1835. The translation therefrom. But before we get into that, we're going to look at a little bit more recent of a book that gives us a little bit more modern take on what we know, and is a secondary source that references back to some of these earlier sources, like the one that we will primarily be reading from, to get into the deep subject that we're going to discuss tonight. Now, this goes way beyond the 101 stuff, folks. If you are a new listener to this podcast or this broadcast, you might have a little catching up to do. So if that's the case, I would encourage you maybe go back and listen to some of the older episodes to get a feel for some of this. Because, well, we'll try our best to lay down the foundations here for you as to who the assassins were and how they came to prominence and what kind of an influence they had to the secret society groups even unto today. So we'll get a little bit into that. But this runs deep, and this is probably going to be, like I said, at least a 2-part series, if not a 3-part series, discussing these things, because there's a lot of information to get in here. So before we begin and get into the main text, we're going to have to go into the secondary source first. Now, the primary text we'll be reading from later is called The History of the Assassins, derived from Oriental sources by the Chevalier Joseph Von Hammer, who later took on the surname Purgstall. And this was translated from the German by Oswald Charles Wood, M.D. Like I said, this was published 1835. 1835. But the secondary source we'll be reading from is a more modern source. This one only dates back to the 1960s. And this one is titled A History of Secret Societies by Arkon Daraul. And this was Citadel Press, New York, copyright 1961. And this is an interesting book that gives you an overview of many of the things that Von Hammer spoke of in the work that we'll be reading from. But we're going to be picking up from a portion a little bit further on in that book. So to lay down the foundation, this one's a little easier to understand and gives you a kind of abbreviated version of how all of these things came about. So, just as an aside, we have this split in Islam happened where we had two distinct sects of Islam that came from that, and this primarily deals with the Ismaili side of this. This is where the assassins derived their information from. So this Nizari Ismaili sect had a school in Cairo, and this is where Hassan Sabah trained, and where he came to adopt the doctrines that he had, and he split a little bit from the main teachings of that group. But let's get into it here. To lay down the background here, a little bit of framework leading us up to the main topic here tonight. Two men in the year 1092 stood on the ramparts of a medieval castle called the Eagle's Nest, sometimes known as the Vulture's Nest as well in other accounts, perched high upon the crags of the Persian mountains. The personal representative of the emperor and the veiled figure who claimed to be the incarnation of God on earth, Hassan, son of Sabah, sheik of the mountains and leader of the assassins, spoke, and he said, "You see that devotee standing guard on yonder turret top? Watch." He made a signal. Instantly, the white-robed figure threw up his hands in salutation and cast himself 2,000 feet into the foaming torrent which surrounds the fortress. "I have 70,000 men and women throughout Asia, each one of them ready to do my bidding. Can your master, Malik Shah, say the same? And he asks me to surrender his sovereignty? This is your answer. Go." Such a scene may be worthy of the most exaggerated of horror films, and yet it took place in historical fact. The only quibble made by the chronicler of the time was that Hassan's devotees numbered only about 40,000 rather than 70,000. How this man, Sabah, came by his uncounted power, and how his devotees struck terror into the hearts of men from the Caspian to Egypt, is one of the most extraordinary of all tales of secret societies. Today, the sect of the Hashishin still exists in the form of the Ismailis or Ishmaelites, whose undisputed chief, endowed by them with divine attributes, is the Aga Khan. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So, the leader of the Ishmaelites or the Ismailis, the Nizari Ismailis, is called the Aga Khan. That is his title. He is the imam, he's the chief, he's the sheik, he's in charge. He's the one who calls the shots, and he's supposed to represent God on earth. Now, this came back in 1092, there, as we see in the text. This was referring to Sabah, Hassan Sabah, in that case. Like many another secret cult, the assassin organization was based upon an earlier association. In order to understand how they worked and what their objectives were, we must begin with these roots. It must be remembered that the followers of Islam in the 7th century AD split into two divisions: the Orthodox, who regard Muhammad as the bringer of divine inspiration, and the Shias, who consider that Ali, his successor, the fourth imam or leader, was more important. It was with the Shias that we are concerned here. Going to pause for a moment. So the Ismailis are derived from the Shias. From the beginning of the split in the early days of Islam, the Shias relied for survival upon secrecy, organization, and initiation. Although the minority party in Islam, they believed that they could overcome the majority, and eventually the whole world, by superior organization and power. To this end, they started a number of societies which practiced secret rites in which the personality of Ali was worshipped, and whose rank and file were trained to struggle above all for the accomplishment of world dominion. One of the most successful secret societies which the Shias founded was centered around the abode of learning in Cairo, Egypt, which was the training ground for fanatics who were conditioned by the most cunning methods to believe in a special divine mission. In order to do this, the original democratic Islamic ideas had to be overcome by skilled teachers acting under the orders of the Caliph of the Fatimites who ruled Egypt at the time. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The original Islamic ideas or ideals had to be overcome by skilled teachers. Pay close attention here. This is what still goes on in all the secret society groups. There's a doctrine here that underlies this, and we'll get to that. Members were enrolled on the understanding that they were to receive hidden power and timeless wisdom, which would enable them to become as important in life as some of the teachers. And the caliph saw to it that the instructors were no ordinary men. The supreme judge was one of them, another was the commander-in-chief of the army, a third the minister of the court. There was no lack of applicants. In any country where the highest officials of the realm formed a body of teachers, one would find the same thing. Classes were divided into study groups, some composed of men, others of women, collectively termed assemblies of wisdom. All lessons were carefully prepared, written down, and submitted to the caliph for his seal. At the end of the lecture, all present kissed the seal, for did the caliph not claim direct descent from Mohammed through his son-in-law Ali, and thence from Ishmael, the seventh Imam? He was the embodiment of divinity, far more than any Tibetan Lama ever was. And I'm going to pause for a moment before we continue. So Ishmael was the seventh Imam, was a descendant of Ali. And this is where we get the term Ishmaelite, or Ismaili, the Nizari Ismailis. Ishmael being the seventh Imam, and they'll speak of the invisible Imam. And this is an important concept we'll get to later. And this, of course, has to do with much of the secrecy and the esoteric doctrine that permeated into these secret society groups and how they used the trappings of external religion to reify their power. And we'll see how a lot of what they say and what they do and who they claim to be is disingenuous, and this goes far beyond just the assassins, folks. This permeates all the secret society groups. This is the model, the prototype, the template that many of the secret society groups that have arisen since have taken on. And this is why they're disingenuous. Because of this doctrine that undergirds all that they do. You see, some of this was actually revealed in politics in recent years. Do you remember back the first election back in 2016, where it was Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton running for the presidency? And Hillary Clinton said you have to have two positions, a public position and a private position on any given topic. Well, same kind of thing goes on here, as we'll see. Let's read on here and we'll continue. So the university in Cairo, the House of Wisdom at Cairo, lavishly endowed and possessing the best manuscripts and scientific instruments available, received a grant of 250,000 gold pieces annually from the caliph. Its external form was similar to the pattern of the ancient Arab universities, not much different from Oxford. Going to pause for a moment. You know, Oxford in England. This is how the old Arab universities were set up. They were great places of learning. There was a lot of culture there that has kind of been hidden in the obscurity of history now. But its real purpose was the complete transformation of the mind of the student. Students had to pass through 9 degrees of initiation. In the first, the teachers threw their pupils into a state of doubt about all conventional ideas, religious and political. I'm going to pause for a moment here once again. This is important, remember, because these are the same methodologies used by secret society groups today, occult fraternities, you name it. This is where they start. This is how they operate and how they function. And we'll see what the end results are as we continue here. So first, The teachers have to throw their pupils into a state of doubt about all conventional ideas, religious and political. They used false analogy and every other divisive argument to make the aspirant believe that what he had been taught by his previous mentors was prejudiced and capable of being challenged. Think about that. The effect of this, according to the Arab historian Makrizi, was to cause him to lean upon the personality of the teachers as the only possible source of the proper interpretation of facts. At the same time, the teachers hinted continually that formal knowledge was merely the cloak for hidden, inner, and powerful truth, whose secret would be imparted when the youth was ready to receive it. This confusion technique was carried out until the student reached the stage where he was prepared to swear a vow of blind allegiance to one or other of his teachers. Gonna pause again. Are you picking up what's being put down here? This is how all of these secret societies of today operate. First thing they do is they convince you everything you think you know is wrong. And here's the thing, a lot of that in the modern culture that we live in is true. Much of what we're taught in our schools is wrong. So they have a lot to work with there. So they convince you that your beliefs, your core values are wrong, and that only they can give you a proper interpretation of that. If you just listen to your teacher, do what they say, they will reveal the secrets to you over the course of time. And then you swear an oath of allegiance. This oath, together with certain secret signs, was administered in due course, and the candidate awarded the first degree of initiation. The second degree took the form of initiation into the fact that the imams, or successors of Muhammad, were the true and only sources of secret knowledge and power. Imams inspired the teachers. Therefore, the student was to acknowledge every saying and act of his appointed guides as blessed and divinely inspired. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So within the secret society groups of today, they're not necessarily claiming that the imams or the successors of Muhammad were the only true sources of knowledge and secret power. Not in some of the secret societies anyway. But they're claiming only the members of their order are the ones who know the secrets. They're the only ones who know about the secret knowledge and power, and the only ones that can really speak with authority on that. They're the ones that were appointed as blessed and divinely inspired teachers within the fraternity. So this, if you're thinking in terms of Freemasonry, this would be your Manly P. Halls and your Albert Pikes of the world. Only these divinely inspired teachers know the true secrets and put them forward. Now let's read on. In the third degree, the esoteric names of the 7 imams were revealed, and the secret words by which they could be conjured, and by which the powers inherent in the very repetition of their names could be liberated and used for the individual, especially in the service of the sect. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So now, what does this look like in other secret society groups of today? Well, they will reveal to you secret words and their meanings and how you can use some of these power words and phrases in certain ways to bring about changes in your fortune or some such thing, or how you have this inherent power that you can seek after. Looks a little different from what the basic formula given here is, but it all aligns in the same way. And the degrees don't exactly follow with this, because as you'll see later, some of the secret society groups have lessened this from 9 degrees to 7 degrees, the assassins being one, and some of them have expounded and expanded upon this. They don't offer all the same number of initiatory rites, There's a lot. They've adopted a lot. So these don't always align one for one with the initiations of the other secret society groups, but certainly it's a blueprint that they operate from. In the fourth degree, the succession of the 7 mystical lawgivers and magical personalities was given to the learner. These were characterized as Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and Ishmael. There were 7 mystical helpers: Seth, Shem, Ishmael, Aaron, Simon, Ali, and Muhammad, the son of Ishmael. This last was dead, but he had a mysterious deputy who was the true Lord of the time, authorized to give his instructions to the people of truth, as the Ismailis called themselves. The hidden figure gave the caliph the power to pretend that he was acting under even higher instructions. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So this would be this invisible 7th Imam who guides from behind the veil. This would be congruent with what the Theosophists might call one of the ascended masters, speaking from the Great White Lodge. You can see how many of the ideologies have been adopted across the board. The names may change a little, but the blueprint's the same. That's the whole point here. That's the point I'm trying to get across. The 5th degree named 12 apostles under the 7 prophets, whose names and functions and magical powers were described. In this degree, the power to influence others by means of personal concentration was supposed to be taught. One writer claims that this was done merely by the repetition for a period of 3 years to train the mind of a specific magical word, which it lists here in the text that I will dare not try to pronounce because I'll butcher the pronunciation first of all, and second of all, I don't think it's prudent to do so. You could find this book and find this word for yourself if you really are that interested in seeing what it is. It's a 3-syllable word. Looks like Arabic to me. But at any rate, this is what's claimed in the 5th degree of these teachings that were given to the Ismailis at the House of Wisdom in Cairo. This is what's said, and you'll notice a lot of this ties over into magic. This is what's taught in some of the higher degrees of the secret society groups that we have today. Those that step beyond what you would call the Blue Lodge in Freemasonry, this is the broad power base. This is the exterior face of the order, where the ones that are involved there, they really don't know what goes on at the higher levels. They think they know, but they do not. And this gives them plausible deniability on a lot of these things. And this operates the same, and we'll see when we get a little further on here, when we get into the Assassins organization itself, how a lot of this has been split down even further as far as the organization goes. Because remember, this is the important portion. This is what Hassan Sabah thought, and this is what many within the Nizari Ismaili cults thought, that through proper organization, they can conquer the world. Even though they may have small numbers compared to others, it's all in how it's organized that things get done. We'll keep that in mind as we continue. To obtain the 6th degree involved instruction in the methods of analytical and destructive argument, in which the postulant had to pass a stiff examination. Going to pause there. So, analytical and destructive argument. This is the art of rhetoric, ladies and gentlemen. It's something that's lost in the bulk of the masses today. Rhetoric. The 7th degree brought revelation of the great secret, that all humanity and all creation were one, and every single thing was part of the whole, which included the creative and destructive power. Gonna pause for a moment. So now it's beginning to sound like every other secret society group out there, doesn't it? Let's continue. But as an Ismaili, the individual could make use of the power, which was ready to be awakened within him, and overcome those who knew nothing of the immense potential of the rest of humanity. This power came through the aid of the mysterious power called the Lord of the Time, or the invisible Imam. To qualify for the 8th degree, the aspirant had to believe that all religion, philosophy, and the like were fraudulent. Gonna pause for a moment, and this is absolutely 100% what they teach at the highest, most levels of all of these secret society groups, because this is the core to their power. When you get high enough, and I shouldn't say the highest, most levels, this is probably the secondary level underneath. They teach you that all religion, philosophy, and the like are fraudulent. And we'll see that Hassan Sabah had a phrase that he used that was the core truth behind the secret doctrine of the assassins, according to him. Nothing is true, all is permitted. That is what the core of the secret doctrine of all of these secret society groups is. That's what they believe, and that's why they don't have any compunction with violating their own standards that they put forward if it suits their purposes. The ends always justify the means, according to these people, and that is why they believe nothing is true. All is permitted. They think themselves beyond moral values. They think themselves beyond being subject to these natural laws, which are inherent in this place. Let's read on. So he says, all that mattered was the individual who could attain fulfillment only through servitude to the greatest developed power, the Imam. Now, the 9th and last degree brought the revelation of the secret that there was no such thing as belief. All that mattered was action. And the only possessor of the reasons for carrying out any action was the chief of the sect. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. Now, this is something that many people may contest and argue with these other secret society groups like we have today. They may say that doesn't apply, doesn't it? Interesting, all the Freemasons seem to vote the same way as the rest of their lodge. Interesting, they all take up the same causes. They all help each other out in many of these ways. And who calls the shots? Who tells them what to do? Well, there's a leader. May not be called the Imam in any particular fraternity, but there's always somebody who claims to know better and claims to have your best interests or the best interests of the organization, and therefore yours, if you're a member of the organization, in mind. And you follow that precept. As we see here, this is how the organizing structure of the early Ismailis was going into the advent of the assassins by Hassan Sabah. As a secret society, the organization of Ismailis, as outlined above, was undoubtedly powerful and seemed likely to produce a large number of devotees who would blindly obey the orders of whomever was in control of the edifice. But as with other bodies of this kind, there were severe limitations from the point of view of effectiveness. Perhaps the phase of revolt or subversion planned by the society did not, in the end, get underway. Perhaps it was not intended to work by any other means than training the individual. Be that as it may, its real success extended abroad only in 1058 to Baghdad, where a member gained temporary control of Baghdad and coined money in the Egyptian caliph's name. This sultan was slain by the Turks, who now entered the picture, and the Cairo headquarters was also threatened. By the year 1123, the society was closed down by the vizier Afdal. the rise of Turkish power seemed to have discouraged the expansionist Cairo sect so strongly that they almost faded out and little is heard of them after that date. It was left to Hassan, son of Sabah, the old man of the mountains, to perfect the system of the ailing secret society and found an organization which has endured for nearly another 1,000 years. Who was Hassan? He was the son of a Shia, or one who worshipped Ali, in Khorasan, a most bigoted man who claimed that his ancestors were Arabs from Kufa. This assumption was probably due to the fact that such lineage bolstered up claims to religious importance then as now among Muslims. The people of the neighborhood, many of them also Shias, stated very decisively that Ali was a Persian, and so were his forebears. It is generally thought that this is the truer version. As the governor of the province was an Orthodox Muslim, Ali spared no efforts to assume the same guise. This is considered to be completely permissible due to this secret doctrine of the assassins and all the other secret society groups, which is called the Doctrine of Intelligent Dissimulation. What does that mean, folks? They lie. That's what it means. They misrepresent who they are and what they believe in public, and privately they believe and do other things. The Doctrine of Intelligent Dissimulation. As there was some doubt as to his reliability in the religious sense, he retired into a monastic retreat and sent his son Hassan to an Orthodox school. This school was no ordinary one. It was the circle of disciples presided over by the redoubtable Imam Muhafiq, about whom it was said that every individual who enrolled under him eventually rose to great power. Muhafiq, this was the teacher of Omar Khayyam, as we'll see here, and also Hassan. That's right, Hassan Sabah was friends with Omar Khayyam and was a student under the same master as Omar Khayyam, a renowned individual, Muhafiq. And we'll see where it goes from here. It was here that Hassan met Omar Khayyam, the tent-maker, poet, and astronomer, later to be the poet laureate of Persia. Another of his schoolmates was Nizam-ul-Mulk, who rose from peasanthood to become prime minister. These three made a pact, according to Nizam's autobiography, whereby whichever rose to high office first would help the others. Nizam, the courtier, became vizier to Alp Arslan, the Turkish Sultan of Persia, in a relatively short time. He helped Omar Khayyam in accordance with his vow and secured him a pension which gave him a life of ease and indulgence in his beloved Nishapur, where many of his Rubaiyat poems were written. Meanwhile, Hassan remained in obscurity, wandering through the Middle East, waiting for his chance to attain power, of which he had dreamed. Arslan the Lion died and was succeeded by Malik Shah. Suddenly, Hassan presented himself to Nizam, demanding to be given a place at court. Delighted to fulfill his childhood vow, the vizier obtained for him a favored place and relates what transpired thus in his autobiography. And he says, quote, I had him made a minister by my strong and extravagant recommendations. Like his father, however, he proved to be a fraud, hypocrite, and self-seeking villain. He was so clever at dissimulation that he appeared to be pious when he was not, and before long he had somehow completely captured the mind of the Shah. End quote. So I'm going to pause for a moment. So, Hassan Sabah. He appeared to be very pious and devout and religious on the surface, but certainly he was not. He used false pretense, a false face, to make people believe he was something he most certainly was not. And we'll see how the rest of this goes and how this translates into what happens in secret societies in general, even today. Malik Shah was young, and Hassan was trained in the Shia art of winning people over by apparent honesty. But Nizam was still the most important man in the realm, and an impressive record of honest dealing and achievements. Hassan decided to eliminate him. Gonna pause for a moment. This guy who was his friend, who owed him the favor, who made the promise to him and fulfilled the promise. So now he's going to betray him. Interesting. This was the kind of disposition Hassan Sabah had. The king had asked in that year, 1078, for a complete accounting of the revenue and expenditure of the empire, and Nizam told him that this would take over a year. Hassan, on the other hand, claimed that the whole work could be done in 40 days and offered to prove it. The task was assigned to him, and the accounts were prepared in the specified time. Something went wrong at this point, however. The balance of historical opinion holds that Nizam struck back at the last moment, saying, "By Allah, this man will destroy us all unless he is rendered harmless, though I cannot kill my playmate." Whatever the truth may be, it seems that Nizam managed to have changed the writings and made such disparities introduced into the final calligraphic version of the accounts that when Hassan started to read them, they appeared to be so absurd that the Shah, in fury, ordered him to be exiled. As he had claimed to have written the accounts in his own hand, Hassan could not justify their incredible deficiencies. Hassan had friends in Isfahan, where he immediately fled. There survives a record of what he said there, which sheds an interesting light upon what was on his mind. One of his friends and later followers, Abu al-Fazal, notes that Hassan, after reciting the bitter tale of his own downfall, shouted these words in a state of uncontrollable rage. He said, "If I had just two devotees who would stand by me, then I would cause the downfall of that Turk and that peasant." Fazal concluded that Hassan had taken leave of his senses and tried to get him out of this ugly mood. Hassan took umbrage and insisted that he was working on a plan and that he would have his revenge. He set off for Egypt, there to mature his plans. Fazal himself later became a devotee of the assassin chief, and Hassan, 2 decades later, reminded him of that day in Isfahan, and he said later on, this was when Hassan Sabah took power, he said, "Here I am at Alamut, master of all I survey and more. The Sultan and the peasant vizier are dead. Have I not kept my vow? Was I the madman you thought me to be? I found my 2 devotees who were necessary to my plans." And this is just some of the background of where the assassins came from. And we're going to get to the rest of the story here. We're going to get into the primary account now that we're working from. Now that we laid down the general background of where this all came from. So Sabah was taught by the same teacher as Omar Khayyam. He had all kinds of training in the House of Wisdom in Cairo, took on the Ismaili teachings, took on the secret doctrines, took on this doctrine of intelligent dissimulation, took all these things into account and crafted his own revenge on the Shah and his former friend who did him wrong because he wanted power. He wanted to be in charge. He had a lot of ambition. So how he came about this was through a little bit of subterfuge and some clever maneuvering. After he had used the art of rhetoric to make people believe him to be a powerful figure, to be a representative of God on earth, he got himself some devotees and followers, and he managed to trick, through subterfuge and various means, the master of the castle of Alamut to give over the property to him. And this is where he set up his stronghold, Alamut, also called the Vulture's Nest or the Eagle's Nest, so called from its impregnable position, situated in the 50-degree, 30-minute east longitude and 36-degree north latitude. It's the largest and strongest of 50 castles, which lie scattered about the district of Rudbar, at a distance of 60 farsangs north of Kazwin. It's said to be about 100 kilometers from Tehran, to give you an idea as to where this is. It is a mountainous country on the confines of Dailam and Iraq, watered by the Sharud or King's River. 2 streams bear this name, one of which rises in the Mount Talkan near Kazwin, the other in Mount Shihir, and flows through the district Rudbar of Alamut. Rudbar means riverland, and is applied to another district as well as this northern one, which is called of Alamut, to distinguish it from the southern Rudbar of Lor, which is situated near Ispahan and is watered by the river of life, Sendrud, as the former is by the King's River, Sharud. Hassan, who had hitherto sought in vain for some central point for the foundation of his power, at length took possession of the castle of Alamut on the night of Wednesday, the 6th of the month of Redisheb, in the 483rd year after the flight of Mohammed, and the 1090th year after the birth of Christ. So this is in 1090 A.D., in the modern era, as we would know it. 7 centuries before the French Revolution, whose first movers were the tools or leaders of secret societies which, like the Ishmaelites, then openly attempted what they had in secret contemplated, the overthrow of thrones and altars. Long experience and extensive knowledge of mankind, profound study of politics and history, had taught the son of Sabah that an atheistical and immoral system was more calculated to accomplish the ruin than the establishment of dynasties and the confusion rather than the ordering of states. That lawlessness may be the canon of the ruler, but ought never to be the code of the subject. That the many are only held together by the few by the bridle of the law, and that morality and religion are the best sureties of the obedience of nations and the security of princes. Gonna pause for a moment here. So, this double doctrine, that's what he's talking about, this double standard. You see, externally, he wanted to be presented as a pious, law-abiding individual, and all of this order had to appear to be very pious men, and all of the culture surrounding them were held to these high standards of law. But behind the scenes, their secret doctrine was to disregard all of that. It's all for show. It's all theater, folks. Political theater. Are you picking up what I'm putting down yet? We'll get a little further here. Initiated into the highest grade of the Lodge of Cairo, he clearly penetrated their plan of boundless ambition, whose object was nothing less than the destruction of the caliphate of the Abbasides and the raising new thrones on their ruins. He who had till now acted as Dei, or religious nuncio and political envoy, in the name of the Fatimite Caliph Mostasar, formed the resolution of securing power to himself instead of his superior, and did not apply himself to the destruction of the works of foreign wisdom and policy so much as to found and fortify the edifice of his own, since, in the opinion of the Mussulman, the supreme dominion was always vested in the person of the Imam Caliph, and the people were merely divided as to whether this was legally inherited by the families of Umayyah, Abbas, or Fatima. No other resource was left to an ambitious chief who usurped thrones and sovereignty than to seek them under the shadow of the caliphate, at that time itself a shadow, and in the name of the reigning caliph. So had but lately the family of Seljuk, as others had done before, possessed themselves of the rule in Asia in the name of the Caliph of Baghdad. Hassan Sabah, who had been unsuccessful in his hopes at the court of the Seljukides, and had disagreed both with the Sultan and his vizier, could only come forward for the Caliph of Cairo. In his name, and under the appearance of the strictest piety, he gained disciples, ostensibly for the Caliphate of Cairo and religion, but in reality for himself and the projects of his lawless ambition. Gonna pause for a moment. So he presented himself as a pious individual, a religious leader, working for the highest accepted power in the land at that time, the one who was supposed to represent the will of God on earth. But he had other things in mind. Let's continue. He obtained possession of Alamut, partly by stratagem and partly by force, and the artifice by which he succeeded received a higher confirmation in the eyes of the multitude by means of the Kabbalah, which very luckily found in the letters of the word Alamut the date of that current year of 483. That's in the Muslim calendar, or the Islamic calendar, 483, year of Hijrah. Hassan adopted the same trick against the Mahdi, the commandant of the castle, in the name of the Sultan Malik Shah, which history mentions as having been used at the foundation of Carthage and other cities. And this is the trick that he had performed. This is what he had done, the deception he used to get his hands on Alamut Castle. He requested, at the price of 3,000 ducats, as much land as an ox's hide would only contain. He split the hide into strips and with them surrounded the castle. Mehdi, who had already some time earlier excluded the Ishmaelites from the fortress, and then, on an arrangement taking place, had readmitted them, was on his not acceding to this purchase, driven out by force, and withdrew to Damaghan. Previous to his departure, Hassan gave him a laconic letter or bill of exchange on the Reis Musaffar, commander of the castle of Kurda, in these words, and it said, quote, Reis Musaffar, pay Mehdi, the descendant of Ali, 3,000 ducats as the price of the castle of Alamut. Health to the Prophet and his family. God, the best ruler, sufficeth us. End quote. Mehdi could not believe that a man like the Reis Musaffar, who enjoyed the highest consideration as a lieutenant of the Seljuks, would pay the slightest respect to the bill of an adventurer like Hassan. He made, therefore, no use of it until his curiosity was spurred by necessity, when, on presenting it to the Reis, to his great astonishment, the 3,000 ducats were immediately paid. The Reis, in fact, was one of the earliest and most faithful followers of Hassan Sabah. The second and most active was Hussein of Kayani. They taught and acted for him as missionaries, the former in Jabal, the latter in Khuzestan, both names meaning highlands and being the northern mountainous provinces of Persia. Hassan provided his metropolis with ramparts and wells. He caused a canal to be dug, bringing the water from a considerable distance to the foot of the castle. He made plantations of fruit trees around the neighborhood and encouraged the inhabitants in the pursuit of agriculture. While he was thus employed in the fortification and defense of his castle, which commanded the whole district of Rudbar, promoting cultivation and raising supplies, his care and attention were still more deeply engaged with the establishment of his own religious and political system, namely, the peculiar policy of the assassins. I'm going to pause for a moment here. This is where the rubber meets the road with a lot of this. So he, through skillful, deceptive practices and a little bit of strong-arming, took the fortress of Alamut and the whole countryside, and he had the people, the villagers who lived there, well, they liked him. He did a lot of things for the area, and they were devout Ismailis. And so they didn't have a problem with this guy being their protector and the ruler of the land. And this is where things get interesting. A power was to be established in which laws were to be given and the want of treasure and troops, the great arms of sovereignty, was to be compensated in unusual ways. History showed, in the sanguinary examples of Bayback and Carmath, who had led hundreds of thousands of people to slaughter, and had fallen themselves the victims of their ambition, how dangerous it is for infidelity and sedition to dare an open contest with the constituted faith and government. Hassan's own experience taught him, by the slender results which the Ishmaelite mission had exhibited in Asia, how useless it was to attempt to propagate the secret doctrine of the Lodge of Cairo as long as its superiors had heads but not hands at their disposal. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. This secret doctrine that he learned at the House of Wisdom in Cairo, it was worthless if there were not hands to carry out the will of those who understood the doctrine. And this is wherein we find this double face of the assassins, the double face of the secret society groups, the externally represented group, the one that is accepted as the face of the group, and then what goes on behind the scenes, the secret doctrine. This is the exoteric and the esoteric. They present themselves to the public as a group of devout men doing righteous things, but behind the scenes at the topmost levels, there are other things that go on. There are other goals, agendas at play, and within the structure itself and how it's organized are people to carry out the agendas of the group. Well, let's flesh this out a little further and tell you what the assassins did, and you could use the law of analogy to understand how it's carried out even unto today by some of these secret society groups. During the 200 years that the empire of the Fatimites had been established in Africa, the lodge first erected at Mahadia, then at Cairo, and the system of secret missions in favor of the Fatimites had been organized. They had indeed succeeded in giving the authority of the Abbasides a shock, but without being able to extend their own, they had assumed the two prerogatives of the mint and public prayers at Baghdad, but could keep possession of them for only a year, and lost it when Besasari succumbed to the arms of Togrul. Under pretense of enlisting partisans to the successors of Ishmael, they had preached atheism and immorality and thereby loosened the religious and moral bonds of civil society without troubling themselves about compensation. They had shaken thrones without being able to overturn or to seat themselves upon them. Nothing of this escaped Hassan's deep reflections, and as he had not been successful in the usual routine of ministerial ambition in playing a part in the empire of the Seljukides, he afterwards, as a nuncio and envoy, paved the way to his own power and planned a system of administration all his own. And this is the secret doctrine adopted by the assassins and which undergirds the secret doctrine of every other secret society today. Quote, "Nothing is true and all is allowed." End quote. Nothing is true and all is allowed was the groundwork of the secret doctrine, which, however, being imparted but to few and concealed under the veil of the most austere religionism and piety, restrained the mind, the yoke of blind obedience, by the already adopted reign of the positive commands of Islamism. The more strictly, the more temporal submission and devotion were sanctioned by eternal rewards and glory. Hitherto, the Ishmaelites had only masters and fellows, namely the Dais, or emissaries, who, being initiated into all the grades of the secret doctrine, enlisted proselytes, and the Refik, who, gradually entrusted with its principles, formed the great majority. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Now, this is the structure of how the secret societies work. They have recruiters, who aren't really recruiters, but they've been initiated into all the grades of the secret doctrine, and they find prospective members, proselytes. Then they also have the Rafiq, this is what they called them, who were gradually entrusted with the principles, and they formed the great majority. This would be equivalent to what we would call the Blue Lodge of Freemasonry today. They know the basic principles. They know the external doctrines. They know the facade that's represented here. And they're entrusted, and they form the great majority, but they don't know all the secrets. They don't know the secret doctrine that underlies all of it. It was manifest to the practical and enterprising spirit of Hassan that, in order to execute great undertakings with security and energy, a third class would also be requisite, who, never being admitted to the mystery of atheism and immorality, which snapped the bonds of all subordination, were but blind and fanatical tools in the hands of their superiors, that a well-organized political body needs not merely heads but also arms, and that the master required not only intelligent and skillful fellows, but also faithful and active agents. These agents were called the Fedavi. The self-offering or devoted is what it means. The name itself declares their destination, the Fedavi. So this is the class that was used by Hassan and by the assassins to get things done. These were the pious, religious individuals who they took advantage of. They enlisted these men, and they convinced these men that only the Grand Master was the representation of God on earth, and that he needed to follow, that these individuals needed to follow the directions and orders of that Grand Master to the letter. They must obey if they wanted to get to paradise, that he alone had the keys to paradise for them in the afterlife, and that only if they died in his service would they get there. This is how perverse this whole thing was and still is. So they believe there is some eternal reward for them if they die in the service of the Grand Master here. If they died doing the will of Hassan Sabah, that they would have paradise. And these were the ones that were not given the secret doctrine of atheism and immorality. It's the mystery of atheism and immorality. It's what they needed to get the job done. They were told it doesn't matter. You do what you're commanded, and that's all you need to do. And they followed because they were devoted, they were devout, and they were deceived by the Grand Master to believe that he himself, and only he, had the keys to paradise. And you can see how a lot of this plays into modern ideologies and modern ways of representing Islamic terrorism. Within the mainstream, this is where the ideal comes from. Of course, we've heard versions of this, haven't we? Associated with that. But this is where Hassan Sabah perfected the system of control. You see, he required people to get things done, not just people sitting behind the scenes thinking about getting things done. He needed actual hands and feet to go out there and do the dirty work without any compunction for what the results were. He needed devotees willing to lay down their life to accomplish the task. So he used this type of fervent extremism to get it done, because he believed in the secret doctrine of atheism and immorality, that this worked. This had to be what you practiced behind the scenes under the facade of piety and righteousness, and that you used the pious and the righteous, the ones who think that they are doing the right thing. They devoutly believe this, that by following the orders of the leader, they are doing the will of God. By doing that, he was able to create this entire system where there's two levels of operation. The one behind the scenes of the secret doctrine, nothing is true, all is permitted. And the exterior, the surface level, that we all see, the external face of the organization. And he committed atrocities by doing this. The Fedavi, that was the name of this class that he introduced. How they afterwards in Syria obtained that of the Hashishin or assassins we shall explain hereafter, when we speak of the means employed to animate them to blind obedience and fanatical self-devotion. Being clothed in white like the followers of Mokanna, the 300 years before in Transoxana, and still earlier, the Christian neophytes, and in our days, the pages of the Sultan, they were termed Mobayis, the white, or likewise Mohamir, the red, because they wore with their white costume red turbans, boots, or girdles, as in our own day do the warriors of the Prince of Lebanon, and in Constantinople, the Janissaries and Bostangis, as bodyguard of the Seraglio. Habited in the hues of innocence and blood, and of pure devotion and murder, armed with daggers which were constantly snatched forth at the service of the Grand Master, they formed his guard, the executioners of his deadly orders, the sanguinary tools of the ambition and revenge of this order of assassins. The Grand Master was called Sidna, or Sidney, our Lord, and commonly Sheikh al-Jabal, the Sheikh, the old man or supreme master of the mountain, because the order always possessed themselves of the castles in the mountainous regions, both in Iraq, Khuzestan, and Syria, and the ancient of the mountains resided in the mountain fort of Alamut, robed in white, like the Ancient of Days in Daniel. He was neither king nor prince in the usual sense of the word, and never assumed the title either of sultan, malik, or emir, but merely that of sheikh, which is to this day the heads of the Arab tribes and the superiors of the religious orders of the Sufis and dervishes that they bear. His authority could be no kingdom or principality, but that of a brotherhood or order. European historians therefore fall into a great mistake in confounding the empire of the assassins with hereditary dynasties, as in the form of its institution it was only an order like that of the Knights of St. John, the Teutonic Knights, or the Templars. The latter of these, besides the Grand Master and Grand Priors and religious nuncios, had also some resemblance to the assassins in their spirit of political interference and secret doctrine. Dressed in white with the distinctive mark of the Red Cross on their mantles, as were the assassins with red girdles and caps, the Templars had also secret tenets which denied and abjured the sanctity of the cross, as the others did the commandments of Islamism. The foundational maxim of the policy of both was to obtain possession of the castles and strong places of the adjacent country, and thus, without pecuniary or military means, to maintain an imperium in imperio, to keep the nations in subjection as dangerous rivals to princes. Gonna pause for a moment here. So the Templars adopted many of the same ideologies as the assassins. It was the same thing. On the surface, the main group, the power base, the base, were all pious, religious, devoted individuals, but in the inner circles, they taught the secret doctrines of atheism and immorality, and this is who controls the order. Those that believe in that, and they convinced them that in performing some of these acts of immorality and atheism, that they were following the will of God or the right path. They convinced the people of this through various means, and perhaps in the second part to this, we'll take a look at some of the techniques used by Hassan Sabah himself and were later adopted into some of these other occult fraternities to convince people that in order to get to heaven or attain paradise, they needed to die in the service of the order and not to deviate from their orders that they were given by their superiors or teachers. Let's continue here with the story of the assassins. The flat part of a country is always commanded by the more mountainous, and the latter by the fortresses scattered through it. To become masters of these by stratagem or force, and to awe princes either by fraud or fear, and to arm the murderer's hand against the enemies of the order, was the political maxim of the assassins. Their internal safety was secured by the strict observance of religious ordinances, their external by fortresses and the poignard. From the proper subjects of the order, or the profane, was only expected the fulfillment of the duties of Islamism, even of the most austere, such as refraining from wine and music. From the devoted satellites was demanded blind subjection and the faithful use of their daggers. The emissaries or initiated worked with their heads and led the arms in execution of the orders of the sheikh, who, in the center of his sovereignty, tranquilly directed, like an animating soul, their hearts and poignards to the accomplishment of his ambitious projects. So I'm going to pause for a moment to add a little bit of context to that. So, externally, the ones sitting on the outskirts of the order, the subjects, who were referred to as the profane, well, they weren't initiated into the secrets. They were just expected to follow the religious laws and be guided by the religious morals, even in a strict capacity. This was externally what was seen. They were seen as a pious group. They followed the laws. They obeyed the laws. But within those who are initiated, they partook of this secret doctrine. They didn't believe any of the religious laws or functions of the profane, as they called the outer band of it. So here's an important truth that's probably lost on a lot who belong to the secret societies today. If you are just a practicing Freemason or some such thing, you belong to the Blue Lodge, you've never gone above the 3rd degree or the degree of Master Mason, you are considered by those in the higher levels of that organization also as the profane. You're given the name of Mason only on the surface. See, you're supposed to be the public face of the organization. You're ignorant of the real doctrines of the organization. You think you know, but you don't. They purposely teach you wrong. They mislead you. This is what we're dealing with, folks. There are so many that are misled out there. There's so many that hold up some of these people that have been preying on them for a long time as somehow saintly or good or having good intentions. And maybe some of them do have good intentions. I don't know. I don't claim to have all the answers. But I do know that underlying all of this, there is this secret doctrine that we've discussed here. This doctrine of intelligent dissemination, as was being talked about. It's the separation. It's the double-faced nature of these secret society groups. They lie to their own lower-level members and initiates. They don't tell them what the secret doctrine truly is. They let them believe that they're doing good, they're doing right. They're doing all of these things for the betterment of mankind. They're doing this in the name of God. They're doing these things in the name of a higher power. And this is what many of them fervently believe. And at the topmost levels, within the order, it's all for some other secret agenda that fulfills this doctrine of atheism and immorality. It's how you get things done. Doesn't matter. There is no belief, only action. Remember. This is what they believe. The leaders of the organization. So they sometimes have their own personal agendas involved in things. But anyway, let's continue on. Immediately under him, the Grand Master, stood the Dalkabar, the Grand Recruiters or Grand Priors, his lieutenants in the 3 provinces to which the power of the order extended, namely Jabal, Kuhastan, and Syria. Beneath them were the Dei, or the religious nuncios, and political emissaries in ordinary as initiated masters. The fellows, the Rafiq, were those who were advancing to the mastership through the several grades of initiation into the secret doctrine. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. So we have the Grand Master, we have the Grand Priors or Grand Recruiters. These all know the secret doctrine. There's the Dei, they're the political emissaries or religious emissaries to political things. They also know the secret doctrine, and they are initiated masters. So we have these 3 levels that do know about the secret doctrine and act in the interests of the secret doctrine and whatever other agenda that the Grand Master has. And beneath them are the fellows who are advancing to the mastership through the several grades of initiation into the secret doctrine. So this is the broad power base. These would be still considered profane, but they listen to the teacher, who uses various means to get them to believe that the teacher and only the teacher knows what's best, and they should follow the dictates of the teacher. The guards of the order, the warriors, were the devoted murderers, the Fedavi, and the Lassic, the aspirants, seem to have been the novices or lay brethren. Besides this 7-fold gradation from Sheik, or Grand Master, Grand Prior, Master, fellows, agents, and lay brothers, down to the profane or the people, there was also another 7-fold gradation of the spiritual hierarchy, who applied themselves exclusively to the before-mentioned doctrine of the Ismailis concerning the 7 speaking and 7 mute imams, and belonged more properly to the theoretical framework of the schism than to the destruction of political powers. According to this arrangement, there live in every generation 7 persons distinguished from each other by their different grades of rank. First, the divinely appointed imam. Second, the proof hudshet, designated by him, with the Ismailis called Asas, or which means the seat. Third, the sumasa, who received instruction from the hudshat, as they did from the imam. Fourth, the missionaries, also called the Dei. Fifth, the musani, the freed, who were admitted to the solemn promise or oath. Sixth, the mukalebi, the dog-like, who sought out subjects fit for conversion for the missionaries, as hounds run down the game for the huntsman. And seventh, mumini, the believers, the people. On comparing these 2 divisions, we perceive that, according to the first, the invisible imam, in whose name the sheik claimed the obedience of the people, and in the second, the guard, of which he made use against the foes of the order, are wanting, but that in other respects the different grades coincide. The proof was the Grand Master, the sumasa, the Grand Prior, the fellows were the freed, and the dog-like the lay brethren. The 4th and 7th, that is, the preachers of the faith and the believers, the cheating missionaries and the duped people, are the same in both. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So they use people to preach. They infiltrated into the religious orders and the churches, and they preached certain things to the believers, and they had agents disseminating these beliefs and not practicing them within the churches, if you want to get technical here. And we see the same thing that goes on in society today, don't we? And those that believe, the followers, the ones that hang on every word, thinking that they're doing good and doing right. We have seen above that the first founder of secret societies in the heart of Islamism, Abdullah Maimun, the son of Qada, established 7 degrees of his doctrine, for which reason, as well as their opinions concerning the 7 imams, his disciples obtained the byname of the Seveners. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The assassins were in order of the Seveners. This appellation, which had been assigned hitherto to the Western Ishmaelites, although they had increased the number of grades from 7 to 9, was, the greater justice, transferred to their new branch, the Eastern Ishmaelites, or Assassins, whose founder, Hassan, the son of Sabah, not only restored the grades to their original number, 7, but also sketched out for the Deis, or missionaries, a particular rule of conduct consisting of 7 points, which had reference not so much to the gradual enlightenment of those who were to be taught, as to the necessary qualifications of the teachers, and was the proper rubric of the order. And we're going to get into that right now, because this is foundational to everything else that we see. The introductory rule was called the Ashanai Risk, or the knowledge of the calling, and comprised the maxims of the knowledge of mankind necessary to the selection of subjects suited to the initiated. Now remember, these 7 points are even used today within these secret brotherhoods. Several proverbs of much vogue among the Deis had relation to this. They contained a sense different from their literal meaning, and it was, sow not in barren soil. Speak not in a house where there is a lamp, implied. Waste not your words on the incapable. Venture not to speak them in the presence of a lawyer, for it was equally dangerous to engage with blockheads as with men of tried knowledge and probity, because the former misunderstood and the latter unmasked the doctrine, and neither would be available either as teachers or instruments. Gonna pause for a moment. So what he's saying is, don't speak to idiots who can't understand any of the nuance of what you're saying, but likewise, don't speak to perhaps highly educated people who will be able to see through your disingenuousness, to be able to see through what it is that this organization is about. Don't speak to them either. They won't be useful as instruments or teachers. These allegorical sentences and the prudential rules, so necessary to avoid all chance of discovery, remind us of a secret society of high antiquity and a celebrated order of modern times. In short, of Pythagoras and the Jesuits. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The Jesuits. They operate under the same principles as the assassins, except they use Christianity as their veil that they hide behind as the facade. Same could be said of Freemasonry. They use Protestantism, whereas the Jesuits would use Catholicism. You see, and although the Freemasons will claim that they don't ascribe to a particular religion, certainly you see all the trappings in Freemasonry of Protestantism. It's just one branch of the occult Renaissance Church of Rome, as the Jesuits are another. And of course, they have their counterparts in all the various religions and cultures. The mysterious adages of the former, which have come down to us and whose peculiar sense is now unintelligible, were probably nothing more than similar maxims to the initiated in his doctrine, and the political prudence in the selection of subjects fit for the different designs of a society reached the highest perfection in that of Jesus. Thus, the Pythagoreans and the Jesuits have a resemblance to the assassins. The second rule of conduct was called tenus, or gaining confidence, and taught that to gain over candidates, they need to do so by flattering their inclinations and passions. Flattery, folks. To win over converts, you flatter them. First, you make sure that you're not throwing seed that's going to the wayside, that it's fallow ground, that they're not overly intelligent and not overly dumb. Then you flatter them and give in to their inclinations and passions and feed that. As soon as they were won, it was requisite, in the third place, to involve them by 1,000 doubts and questions concerning the positive religious commands and absurdities of the Koran, in a maze of scruples which were not to be resolved, and of uncertainty which was not to be disentangled. And I'll pause there for a moment just to say, well, you could substitute the Bible for the Koran in this instance, and certainly that's been done by the secret society groups. They will go ahead and sow doubts and questions with a maze of scruples and uncertainty, which were not designed to ever have an appropriate answer, to leave you confused, to leave you doubting the moral truths that were inherent there. In the fourth place, followed the oath, by which the acolyte bound himself in the most solemn manner to inviolable silence and submission, that he would impart his doubts to none but his superior, that he would blindly obey him and none but him. In the fifth rule, called Tedless, the candidates were taught how their doctrine and opinions agreed with those of the greatest men in church and state. This was done the more to extract and fire them up by the examples of the great and powerful. I'm going to pause for a moment. So all of our wonderful leaders who are historically honored, well, they all belong to our secret society group. They all held these fundamentals. They had the same beliefs as us. Do you see what was done here? This is a blueprint, folks. This is a formula. This is how the secret societies operate. They use flattery. They make you think maybe you're special. They pick you out because they believe you to be gullible enough to follow what they tell you, but not so gullible as to be unuseful to them. And then they use flattery to win you over. They sow doubts of confusion into your mind. They make you take secret oaths and vow allegiance to them, under the penalty of death in many cases, in heinous ways. And then they tell you about how their organization, well, they're at the center of all the power in the world. All of their great members are part of the power structure and have been historically honored and part of the power structure. And they make you believe they're working for the good behind the scenes, secretly. Now let's get to the sixth notion here. The sixth, also called thesis, or confirmation, merely recapitulated all that had preceded in order to confirm and strengthen the learner's faith. I'm going to pause for a moment. So now you're adopting a faith of a non-faith, really, when it comes down to it. Faith in atheism. That couldn't be more contradictory, could it? Couldn't be any more of an oxymoron. But certainly, this is the notion. So it's all a reification of the things they've already indoctrinated into you at that point. And then after this followed in the seventh place, called Tevil, the allegorical instruction, which was the conclusion of the course of atheistical instruction. In Tevil, The allegorical explanation, in opposition to tensil, or the literal sense of the divine word, was the principal essence of the secret doctrine, from which they were named Batini, the esoterics, to distinguish them from the Jahari, or followers of the outward worship, by means of this crafty system of exposition and interpretation, which in our own days has often been applied to the Bible. Articles of faith and duties become mere allegories, the external form merely contingent, the inner sense alone essential, the observance or non-observance of religious ordinances and moral laws equally indifferent. Consequently, all was doubtful and nothing prohibited. This was the acme of the philosophy of the assassins, which was not imparted by the founder to the majority, but reserved only for a few of the initiated and principled leaders, while the people were held under the yoke of the strictest exercise of the precepts of Islamism. His greatest policy consisted in designing his doctrine of infidelity and immorality, not for the ruled, but only for the rulers, in subjecting the tensely reined and blind obedience of the former to the equally blind but unbridled despotic commands of the second, and thus he made both serve the aim of his ambition, the former by the renunciation, the latter by the full gratification of their passions. Study and the sciences were therefore the lot of only a few who were initiated. For the immediate attainment of their objects, the order was less in need of heads than arms, and did not employ pens but daggers, whose points were everywhere, while their hilts were in the hands of the Grand Master. And I think we're going to stop right there for tonight, folks. And we'll continue this in a part 2. But the important takeaway here, the secret doctrine of the assassins is the same secret doctrine that underlies all the secret society groups. You see, they use a facade of being some type of a benevolent organization to fool people into believing that's what they do, but behind the scenes there are some very callous people with real agendas that they want to see come to fruition, and they don't believe the same things you and I believe. You see, it's the allegorical explanation that's given to the highest, most levels. And this has been so abused in some of the secret society groups. They tell you, oh, all of that stuff in the Bible, none of that's true. It's all just based in allegory. And when you understand that the esoteric doctrines are the only true doctrines, then you know some things when really you don't. All you're left with is no moral compass, no compunction with doing wrong to another, no compunction for obeying natural laws that were put in place in this world by the Creator. And the ends always justify the means. There is no higher power to answer to. There is no belief, only action. Nothing is true, all is permitted. That is the secret doctrine in a nutshell, but only for the ruling class. And now you understand a little something about this world, folks. But we will continue this next time when we get into some of the more specific actions of Hassan Sabah to indoctrinate obedience into his Fedavi, the assassins, the ones that were known to go out there and perform the will of the Grand Master. Anyway, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to remind you I appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good one now. Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit, except no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.